Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and today I'm going to ask you to forget everything you know about shield charge. What's that? You don't really know anything about shield charge? Because it's just never really been used. Alright, well then, welcome to shield charge. This is essentially the revamped and brand spanking new version of a old skill that barely saw any use because it was so garbage for so long. Finally been buffed and to such surprising levels that it's essentially a tier 1 melee skill now, if you could call it a melee skill. Because with the changes that were made to it for the AoE that it now possesses throughout its charge phase and its actual destination slam phase, it's got absolutely absurd range when you combine it with AoE from things like Slayer, the AoE support gem, and even a carcass jack if you want to get that extreme. You're pretty much going to be hitting the entire screen and charging straight through it in a fair amount of safety. So as far as melee skills go, it's become really strong and versatile, and you could build rather clumsily if you really wanted to, with minimal amounts of defenses, wearing an abyssus, and basically just treating it as a run and gun sort of character. This scene here, Creighton with his flicker strike can barely even land a hit just because we're all over the place, just like he is, being a bit of a cunt. And this is a Graveyard Mervale. Our character is actually still pretty low level and not very well geared, but Facebreaker, which is the build I've chosen to go with, doesn't scale too high into gear levels, so it's fairly cheap to start with and doesn't go too far in terms of what kind of gear you do need. Sitting at level 81, we are a duelist slayer with almost 5,500 life, wearing a tabula, no weapon because I'm running a Facebreaker non-crit setup with an Abyssus and pretty modest gear everywhere else, including your staple of a Meganoids and just a few resist pieces. The tree essentially is a Facebreaker tree, absolutely nothing special about it. Right now even, I have a garbage tree because I just respect out of swords, so take pretty lenient note of like these passives and these passives because they don't apply at all to Facebreaker sort of damage. I was leveling as Lacerate, and once I decided to try out Shield Charge, it blew away Lacerate out of the water completely. And this is what the skill looks like nowadays, just completely face rolling and such fast potential in terms of clear speed and playstyle. I would rival this at the top end of gear, probably to a nice, well, what was Val Molten Shell, just by whirling through every target. Instead now, you just charge through every single target and one-shot them. So as long as you can keep this damage up into tier 15 maps, and I should be able to, pretty much, then the playstyle will be insane and the clear will be insane. The biggest problem this build has at the moment is single target damage. Because the bulk of your shield charge damage comes from going from range, once you're on a boss you have to kind of ping pong around through him, and that's how you get most of your damage, because if you keep shield charging just directly on the spot, you don't do all that much damage. As you can see here, not that much. So you kind of have to ping pong around through him, and on top of that, we actually supplement our single target damage by using an Ancestral Warchief Totem. And that's going to, at the moment it's sitting in my tabula in a 5-link with the rest of it, but an ideal 4-link setup would just include Conk Effect, because that scales the damage quite wildly of this skill. So Conk Effect, melee fizz, and probably faster attacks is what you're looking for on your Warchief, and that gives you a lot of extra single target and basically carries you where this skill fails in single target damage. So what my proper passive tree for Facebreaker Shield Charge is supposed to look like is more like this. Starting out as a Slayer, but you can also be a Berserker, because it's got very good ascendancies for the build as well. But I started out as a Duelist Slayer, and you basically just have to get general damage, so melee physical damage, and increased physical or melee physical while we're using a shield, because that's the only type of damage that applies to Facebreaker. Things like this physical damage with one-hand melee weapons doesn't apply, and neither do any of the actual weapon specializations, so it leaves you with limited amounts of damage you can actually scale, but also opens up a lot of defensive possibilities. So with only 105 points, I've got most of the damage I want from the tree, as well as a few jewel sockets, and we've got 195% life, and you can spend a few more points on defenses. We've also got some AoE, plenty of regen, and it's ended up being a fairly strong tree, both defensively and offensively. The way Facebreakers actually work and scale, if you're unfamiliar with it, is that your initial attack without a weapon isn't really anything. So the way you have to scale it is by getting adds physical damage to attacks, which then gets scaled extremely highly by Facebreakers, up to 800% increased physical damage. So each extra point here is worth 8 times what it's actually worth, thanks to all of this scaling. Which means you really want to try and fit an Abyssus into the build, as well as every other piece of added physical, like a Mega Nods, physical on your rings, and physical on your amulet, and there's also a shield you can get with physical, but that one is kind of up in the air. However, you are not entirely tied to becoming just a Facebreaker character for this type of skill and playstyle. You can in fact be pretty much any weapon and any spec for shield charge, because the way shield charge works, it is based off of your main hand weapon damage. So if you currently have a sword in that slot, then you will be attacking with sword and everything scaled around swords, including if you're fully crit. So while using Facebreakers is a really strong, cheap, early alternative, it may not be the strongest way of building a shield charge character, because there are quite a few other alternatives. For starters, non-crit swords. If you have a probably 300-400 DPS one-hand sword, you could probably scale higher than Facebreaker damage. The thing is, Facebreakers is just really easy to start out with and offer large damage scaling off of a little investment. But once you get good enough weapons, you can then go things like swords, or you can go full axe spec, you can go full mace spec, or you can start delving into the world of crit swords by taking things like disemboweling and traveling around to the right side of the tree, where you grab things like Fatal Blade and Heartseeker. And because we're running Abyssus, and you will be running Abyssus, you get lots of crit multi, you get lots of fizz damage, and crit scaling should be absolutely insane. The problem with the crit builds is you start to spread yourself a bit thin across the passive tree, and you probably won't have the same level of life. So you may start to look into going onto things like Juggernaut to cancel out the drawbacks of Abyssus and just being crit in general, giving you extra accuracy and the spread outedness of your tree. But for the non-crit Facebreaker or shield charge in general character, I feel like Berserker for the 40% extra damage with all the extra attack speeds and the life leech, or Slayer is your best bet. Now Slayer, while it has all these two-hand nodes here, here, and here, that doesn't really matter because you do still get the attack speed there, but most importantly you gain Onslaught, you gain 20% Cull, 50% reduced Fizz Reflect, which essentially means you wearing Abyssus means nothing for Reflect, 20% more damage, 20% increased area, as well as another 20% area there in total. Now, Onslaught is actually quite important because the way Shield Charge works is the distance you travel is amplified, or rather sped up by faster attacks. So your attack speed in the form of a faster attack support and all attack speed scaling, as well as run speed. So when you have less attack speed, you can see that you should charge a bit slower and travel a distance slower. Likewise, when you have a run speed pot up, you should charge quicker. And so Onslaught double dips in that sense, in that you get 20% attack speed and 20% movement speed, and that is also why Vile Haste is very important to the build too. Both of those things combined will vastly increase the speed and rate at which you are shield charging. Nowhere is that more apparent than when you finally come across an acceleration shrine and watch the absolute hilarity ensue as you can barely control your character from the speed and rate at which you are ping-ponging around the entire screen, just loving life. Mana becomes a bit of an issue when you attack like 10,000 times a second, but even then, I'm on a 5 link right now, and it's pretty damn simple to cover mana because it's only 19 mana per cast, and I'm sustaining entirely off of a mana flask, even though a just small piece of fizz mana leech somewhere would do the same trick too. Link setup is simply a tabula rasa that I found from one of the prophecies, with Shield Charge and Ancestral War Chief both in it, each using a 5 link. Now the most important things for Shield Charge in my opinion are melee physical and increased area. Beyond that, I would probably go for Fortify if you're running an Abyssus. If not, grab a faster attacks or an added fire, but the current 5 link is Fortify, faster attacks, melee fizz and increased area. A 6th link would probably at this point potentially be Conk Effect or added fire, and ideally we're going for a 6 link armor base armor, so something like an Astral, but you can go for absolute max potato AoE and get a Carcass Jack, which would just increase my AoE to pretty much almost off-screen amounts of shield charge goodness. Besides that, there's not much else to mention. I'm running Herald of Ash and a Blasphemy vulnerability right now, simply because I feel like it. You could also run a Hatred instead of the Blasphemy and just self-curse whenever you feel like. You can run Blood Magic if you really want, and then reserve all of your mana by grabbing a bit more reservation and getting Vulnerability plus Herald of Ash plus Hatred, but for now I am pretty much purely physical with a bit of Herald of Ash and overkill damage while running Vulnerability with a Blasphemy. The other thing you could do is of course run a Warlord's Mark just for extra leech, gaining endurance charges and gaining mana leech quite easily to drop your mana flask, but we could drop our mana flask as soon as we get just a bit of fizz mana leech anyway. Running a Stibnite flask, a Quicksilver for faster moving and faster charging, and a Basalt flask to try and help negate some of the Abyssus. The Abyssus at the moment really isn't much of a problem because we do have a fair amount of life, a bit of mitigation, you're going to be running a shield so you got plenty of block, and we're perma fortifying. In any case, this character's still fairly young, I will be playing it quite a bit more and exploring different ways of shield charging, including potentially some crit versions with some energy shield, something like an assassin. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this shield charge demo and the way I've built my character. Have a go yourself, shield charge is insanely fun, and I'll see you guys next time.